what we're going to do is we'll just start with the first question, and we'll bat it around. First question that is what is singleness a purpose in everyday terms? Second part of that is where did the idea come from? Why is it important today?
Thomas?
Yeah, I'm Tom Iverson, an alcoholic. I wasn't there when we started, but when we started, there was uncertainty about who should or should not be in AA when it first got together. There was only 6 or 7 people when AA formed, and one of the first people that came in was a homosexual guy, and so there was a lot of consternation and uncertainty about whether we ought to take on that kind of a deal. And so they put it to the group conscience of that small gathering and decided that we didn't have a right to block somebody like that. And so that opened the door. And it's never been a problem since. There's never even been an issue since that I'm aware of. So that seems the purpose. It has to do with the focus on alcoholism. That's our primary focus. That's our primary purpose. And as long as we stay on that purpose, we're in good shape. And then we start getting out into etiology and causation and all that kind of stuff, we wind up out in left field. And so I personally think it's awfully important to keep focused on what we're trying to deal with, and that's alcoholism. That if I'm not drinking, I'm a fairly average human. But you let me have a drink, and I am a totally abnormal human, and don't even act human. So I think that's what it is. We want to stay focused on exactly what we're about, and that's the illness of alcoholism.
And I think one of the things that I appreciate about Singleness of Purpose is that it helps me stay focused, is that, our primary purpose is to stay sober and help other alcoholics achieve sobriety. And although there may be some folks that I work with that have, other things going on in their life beyond alcoholism, and I know I can speak from my personal experience. I know once I treat my alcoholism on a daily basis, some of that other stuff kind of falls into place, and I think one of the challenges with trying to be all things to all people is we end up scattered and not really being able to help anybody, and that was the fate of other fellowships that sprang up and had a good thing going and then lost it because they tried to be all things to all people. And I think that's one of the things that helps me stay focused.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I recently dealt with a guy in our group that we had a couple of fellows that it was pretty apparent. You didn't have to be a genius to figure it out. They were basically from another fellowship, and they were trying to plant the flag in this group to make it okay for non-alcoholics to be here, and I caught up with one of the fellows one night. He was the only one here, and I caught up with him, took him to the very end of our building, right down the hall there, took him way down there, and we talked about it for probably an hour, and what I've tried to do was to help him understand that we were not negative toward his problem, and he kept trying to say to me that well, it's all the same, it's just he's giving me a chemistry lesson, and I said, well, I don't quite agree with you, but the fact is that I'm not concerned about you. I mean I care about you as a human being, but I'm not concerned about you. I'm concerned about the next alcoholic who walks into this room believing what he's heard, that this is a place where alcoholics meet. He comes in and he sees you, he thinks he's in the wrong place. And so that's what I'm concerned about. I'm not concerned about you. I think you're going to be okay. But if we start trying to be all things to all people, we wind up being nothing to anybody. Yeah. And today, and I guarantee you, when he left the building that night, we had a friend in that guy. And there was no animosity, no hostility. He fully understood what we were about. And I told him, you come back anytime, because, my God, man, you'd qualify for any fellowship I've ever heard of. You got it all.
Are more people today alcoholics and something else than when AA was founded?
I think it's always been that way, but I think it's far more flagrant now than I recall. Just like I mentioned about the homosexual guy, that was a awkward thing that got founded, and then once it settled in, it was never an issue again. And the thing of singles purpose, like today, we see it mostly as like drug addicts and things like that. That was not nearly as dominant, as prominent back then as it is now. And NA it came into being not too long after AA. It came along, and so there wasn't the level of difficulty with it back then, as I recall. That it was still there, but not much, and. But it's grown over the years and continues to grow over the years.
I guess when I read the history of, the early days of Alcoholics Anonymous and AA Comes of Age and other literature that we have, it seems like it's always been a challenge that, for lack of a better word, there's going to be somebody with an outside issue beyond alcoholism that. And I guess the fear is, ironically, is they're going to come in and ruin our bad reputation. And, although, we do want to stick to our primary purpose, or a singleness of purpose as well, I think that's something that's gone on over the years. So maybe the answer to that question is there may be more people coming in Alcoholics Anonymous with other issues beyond alcoholism. But how we handle them probably remains the same as it did in the early days. That we welcome with open arms if they have a desire to quit drinking, and they're a member if they say they're a member, provided they've got a problem with alcohol.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we handle it better now than we used to a long time ago. When it first started breaking, I was around when it first started being a conflict, where people who were drug addicts would come into the program, and there was a lot of personal confrontation. Where a member take it on himself to say you don't belong here, and really kind of rudely just push him out the door, and that always bothered me because I think, my God, man, if you get kicked out of AA, where do you go? And that just seemed troublesome to me, and so over the years we have modified that. Moderated that. Mm-hmm. So today we don't do that with people. Just like the guy I mentioned, I took him into a private place and had a personal conversation with him, not a confrontation or demeaning kind of a thing. So I think we've greatly improved the way we deal with the problem. The problem's still here and it's still big. So it's still there, and I think it has grown. The drug culture has grown far more than it was, years ago. So we've had to deal with it, but I don't find nearly as much problem as we did back, way back then when we dealt with it more crudely.
So you think we've made some progress in that area? That's good news.
Yeah, I think we've made some very good progress there.
Now, if I use other substances in addition to alcohol, can I become an AA member?
Yeah. Yeah, well, I think you can. In fact, I know you can. It's alcoholics. I would imagine that the majority of alcoholics have other substances that they use, like medication. I just had my knees replaced, and I guarantee you, I was on something that wasn't legal. Well, it was legal. I bought it, I guess, but that guy said, I'm going to give you something. I said, what is it? No, he didn't say give you something. He said, I'm going to inject something. I said, what is it? And he told me what it was. It didn't mean a thing to me. It's a big, long word. And I said, is it an addictive kind of a thing? He said, I don't think it will be. But I tell you what, you better take it because you're going to be in some pain like you've never known. And so the whole notion that we're going to be pure, not have any kind of a contaminant, that's wishful thinking. That most people are going to encounter some kind of stuff. I mean, we're just normal human beings. I think what we have to be mindful of is generating the notion that it doesn't matter what you take. It does matter. And anything that changes the mood of an alcoholic or changes the feel is a dangerous product. And so I think we have to be awfully careful. I tell you the other place that I think we have to be awfully careful, and in fact our book kind of warns about it, when the way you put it in the book is we got to be sure to operate within our limits. It's not exactly the way it says it. But I've seen suicides, literally suicides, that came as a result of an AA member dictating to somebody with a serious medical problem that they couldn't take the medication. And I've literally seen suicides as a result of that. So I think the guidance in the book is absolutely right. We have to reckon we're not physicians, we're not medical people. Well, some of us are, but not many. And but boy, that's a critically important thing, that we learn to differentiate between, what a legal medical thing is as opposed to alcoholism. So it's important for us to stay on our toes about that.
And there's a great section at the end of the Living Sober book. I think it's the very last thing in the book, and that's exactly what it talks about is, seeking medical guidance, especially during DTs and withdrawals, and in the coming months afterwards, making sure that we stay fit mentally and physically with the help of a medical expert.
Yeah.
I know for me, when I came in Alcoholics Anonymous, I loved alcohol from the bottom of my heart, and I loved a lot of other things from the bottom of my heart as well. And I'm grateful that I was welcome as a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, because I am an alcoholic and I had a desire to quit drinking. And just to kind of tag on to that, I guess, is, I found when I treated my alcoholism, a lot of the other things that I suffered from came into check, because sobriety was free from all mood-altering chemicals, and in that I say it was self-prescribed mood-altering chemicals and not doctor-prescribed medicines. And I think that we address that in probably a later question on this as well, so we'll probably come back to that maybe. If I don't think I have a problem with alcohol, but I do with other issues, can I come to a closed AA meeting?
Well, we don't have rules. We have principles we live by, and one of them is singleness of purpose, and one of them that a closed meeting means that it's open to alcoholics only, and the reason for it is that a lot of people come in and they're extremely concerned about their anonymity. They may be leading people in a community, or my God, we get everybody from ministers to judges to police officers. There's no limit to who comes in. And if we get loosey-goosey with this whole business of if a closed meeting doesn't really mean it's closed, a guy who's very flinchy about his anonymity is going to be squeezed out. And we don't want to do that. And I think it's an awfully important thing to assure that a closed meeting stays closed as much as we possibly can. Because it's about the next person coming in. That we don't want to false advertise that a closed meeting means everybody like Noah's Ark. That we don't want that. Yeah.
And I agree with that 100%. But I guess on the flip side of that coin is sometimes we may have brand new people coming in trying to sort out, are they an alcoholic? Maybe they're a drug addict, and maybe they're a mixture in between. And so I think one of the things that I think we need to be sensitive of is if we've got a brand new person, is at least giving them some kind of time to sort through that. And I think one of the solutions that I know one of our groups had is a newcomer meeting that's open to anybody, during that period that people can sort that out. So I think that's helpful to make sure that we don't pounce on somebody, I guess, for lack of a better word, if they show up in a closed meeting not really sure what they are, and give them time to sort through that. But what's helpful is to direct them to newcomer meetings too, that may be open to anyone.
I think that's a vital point, that a newcomer meeting, in the history of this group, we've had very few real conflicts with singleness and purpose stuff. And I think the newcomer meeting is the primary reason for that, because that does give an alternative, and I think it's a great tool. And short of that, that the other thing, in case like we didn't have before we started our current group, we didn't have a newcomer meeting. But what we would typically do would be to watch for new people coming in. And if they were not alcoholic, deal with them privately. It's extremely important to not handle that publicly, because when you do, there's no winner. Nobody wins. And in those old days when we used to tell people openly you can't be here, you need to go here, that's a cruel way to treat somebody looking for trouble, or looking for getting out of trouble. And I had a guy come in one night, and he was, God almighty, I think he'd been on a space trip or something. He was really just wild as a rabbit. And so I tried to talk with him in the group, and I was like trying to talk to the Energizer Bunny. And so I took him outside. Nothing ugly, but I just took him outside and got him in a little alley we had down at our old meeting place. And we just had a little heart talk. And the guy turned out, when he got through with his frills and the crazy energy, the guy was as alcoholic as me. But he was just so caught up in all of that tangled mess that he'd been dealing with. And so I got there, and I made him make a solemn vow that he was alcoholic. I took him into the meeting, and on condition that he not talk. Don't say anything to anybody. But anyway, I think we can deal with that and try to. But we'd start just accosting people and pushing them around. That's way out of whack. Yeah.
So if a person doesn't have an alcohol problem but does have other problems, or a drug addict, can they get a sponsor in AA?
Not as far as I'm concerned. It'd be like a Catholic getting a. Well, anyway, I don't know on that.
And that question, that kind of came from my own experience, and that was, I had some guys that I sponsored, and I guess a lot of the guys my age now, young guys, between their teens and early 20s, a lot of them, they seem to have other issues, a lot of drugs, a lot of opiate use, a lot of all that stuff. And, I had a guy flat out tell me one time that I could not relate to him because I'd never shot pills before. Mm-hmm. And, I've got a lot of andas too, but shooting pills wasn't one of them. But, I honestly feel like, me, if I go back out there today and I start smoking pot, or I start, taking pills or anything like that, I'll wind up back at alcohol just as quick as I could if I had just started at alcohol. And I agree with what Steve said earlier about, if I'm serious about getting sober and getting help, a lot of the other issues in my life will straighten out when I get sober. But that was just kind of my thinking on it, because there's been several guys that I swear I know that they've got a problem, but they really don't drink. I mean, but I think that if they did start drinking, they'd have a problem pretty quick. But they honestly really didn't drink, and I just that was my curiosity, my thought about it.
So I think the way I handle things like that when I'm sponsoring a new guy, and I want to try to get clear that he has got a drinking problem, or if he admits he's an alcoholic. But beyond the other stuff that he may have done, whether it's shooting pills, smoking crack, or whatever that I've never done, I don't get caught up in that. I'll work with a drug addict, provided he's an alcoholic and has got a problem with alcohol. I don't care what else he's got going on. I'm willing to work with him and be helpful because beyond, I guess, the third chapter in the big book, when we sit down and start reading it, beyond the third chapter, we're going to get into the solution. I'm going to show the guy, exactly, what I did and share with him how I got sober and stayed sober, and hopefully, was able to achieve permanent sobriety a day at a time that the big book refers to on several occasions. So I don't get hung up with a guy that might have some other stuff going on. We're going to get into the solution. The next question is, which just kind of leads into it, is I guess this would be speaking for a person that's just an addict, and let's say that we do have another fellowship that Narcotics Anonymous for addicts only, but they don't want to join that fellowship. How do we handle that if they just are pretty adamant they're strictly a drug addict and don't want to join Narcotics Anonymous? They want to join Alcoholics Anonymous.
Start drinking.
Well, as far as I'm concerned, there's no room at the end. There's I think we have to think of it in a broader term than this guy and his problem. We've got to think about the other people sitting in there. And if we say that it's a closed meeting, that people who really need it, a lot of people come to AA and they're afraid that they're going to get notoriety or something like that. Attorneys, for example, that they are very flinchy about coming into AA because of this bankers, and ministers. We get some of everything, and so I think there's that we just have to recognize our limitations. That we can't be everything to everybody. If we do, we wind up being nothing to anybody. And so I think there are some parameters that we have to stay within. And now I've personally worked with a lot of drug addicts, but not in the context of AA. If somebody wanted to get help with going through an inventory, stuff like that, I've done that several times. But it's in the context of somebody who's had the experience of doing that. And so we use the same tools. It's just that we have that difference in terms of our makeup, that I think we have to keep a pretty clear line, about where we go with that thing. Else we wind up trying to be all things to all people.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think for me, and this is just my personal experience on it, and, this didn't go, this singleness purpose is established. I'm talking about my own personal experience. I was I am an alcoholic. I smoked a lot of pot, did a lot of pills, and I started with pills. But I know I never smoked crack, never even seen crack as far as I know in my life. But I'm sure if I smoked it, I'd be addicted just as quick as I could be. I don't, for me, I know from my experience, and I think that there's a lot of people this way just from my watching them, but it doesn't matter what it is for me. If I start using it and it's a mood-altering substance, I'm going to run with it. I'm going to get addicted just like I did to alcohol. So, if that's just my, my thought on it, too.
Well, I wouldn't. I sucked up enough speed to launch the Sputnik, but I wasn't addicted.
Can I quote you on that?
Yeah. I just liked long parties. And that was the only reason I did. I wasn't hooked on it. But I really liked that rush and that thing of what it do. And I could stay drunk for a week.
You like the effects produced by it?
Oh yeah. I could stay with it. Thank God.
So what you're saying is you're a drug addict trapped in an alcoholic's body.
Yeah, but I wouldn't want to go back the next day.
Yeah. So we're going to wrap up this part of it that with another probing question, that if an addict is someone who suffers from an addiction, and alcoholics are addicted to alcohol, why do people in meetings condemn newcomers for calling themselves addicts instead of alcoholics?
And that goes beyond newcomers too, because I was in a meeting the other day and I heard a woman she was from another meeting. I don't know if she was from another fellowship, but I think she had 2 or 3 years, and she identified herself as an alcoholic and an addict.
Yeah, a lot of people do it. I know if I'm working with somebody, well, for example, if I'm working with somebody that's just come out of treatment, they'll nearly always use a double tag. It's part of a treatment that they go, like people in treatment deal with addicts and alcoholics in the same setting, in the same groups. And so a lot of them come out of treatment and they're caught up in that alcoholic and an addict. If I'm working with somebody, I work with them on getting away from that, and identifying. If you're in the AA, why would you bring another label in? It doesn't make sense. It doesn't add anything. And so that's what I do personally with that is, I'll ease them out of that. Yeah.
And that I agree with you 100% because when I was introduced to Alcoholics Anonymous through a treatment facility, that was what I was coached on, that you introduce yourself as an alcoholic and a drug addict because I think the reason behind that was to always be constantly reminded that I'm not just an alcoholic, that I'm a drug addict too, and I can't use alcohol safely in any form, nor can I use any other mood-altering chemicals safely in any form. And so actually for years in Alcoholics Anonymous, I introduced myself as an alcoholic and a drug addict because, I just, that was the way I was coached coming out of treatment. And unfortunately, I wasn't, coached in any other way until I asked a guy one time that I knew he was, we had a lot in common. And I said, you just introduced yourself as an alcoholic only and not an addict. And he says, he said, I saved my breath. He said, there's no point in it. He said, especially in an AA meeting that I'm an alcoholic, I don't need to say anything beyond that. That's it. That's the bottom line. That qualifies me for membership in this, in Alcoholics Anonymous. And so, although that guy wasn't my sponsor, what I do is I think some of that comes down to good sponsorship too. Is that if I've got a sponsor doing that, I just coach him on the importance of or the unimportance of saying that he's an addict as well, and realizing again that as long as I'm treating my alcoholism a day at a time, that I don't have a desire to go do a bunch of other stuff that I used to like to do.
Yeah, I agree with both of y'all on I started here at this meeting, in the beginners meeting, and I identified myself as both, alcoholic and an addict because I didn't know any better. I mean, I just came in and I heard other people say it, and I was like, well, I smoked a lot of pot and did a lot of pills. I'm an addict too. But my sponsor sat me down and he just said, kind of in passing, and I thought about it and I realized he was right. I don't need to say that I'm an addict too, but I think it was important at the time. It's kind of like in treatment. I needed to be reminded that I was both. But I didn't need to carry it beyond that meeting.
I know personally, if I'm working with somebody, I'll give them about 6 months, because I figure it's going to take that long to get that habit broken, And so, but putting heat on them and pressure on them and mandates and all that, I just never have felt that was the right way to do that.
And I think for me, it's when I say if I introduce myself as Mathew, an alcoholic and an addict, I feel like I'm trying to put separation between me and the people around me. I'm in a meeting, Alcoholics Anonymous. Everybody's introducing themselves as an alcoholic, and then all of a sudden I pop up with and an addict. I think it's just trying to distance myself from everybody else.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Yeah.
So yeah, although some people might condemn newcomers for doing that, hopefully that's not the case. And it's like a lot of things one-on-one with sponsorship, or even if you talk to the person one-on-one, is just what I try to do is just share my experience of how the importance of it to me, and in a hopefully a loving and tolerant way.
Yeah, why would you walk in a Catholic church and say I'm a Baptist?
You wouldn't make it out alive.
That's a bad idea.
It'd be about the same kind of deal.
Well, there was one thing I wanted to add to this question. I thought about it earlier and I didn't write it down. Talking about the singleness of purpose, if somebody picks up a chip, goes for however long they go, say 9 months down the line, and this happened to me. I was smoking pot on the side, just a little bit to ease the tension of being sober, and where does that fall in AA? I mean, my personal experience on it is I can't take any mood altering substance and stay sober because it's going to lead me straight back to drinking in a heartbeat. But what if say somebody's never had a problem with, let's say, cocaine or whatever it is. I mean, to me that constitutes a relapse, but I don't really have I'm not really sure where that falls inside, like, the confines of the big book or AA approved literature. That's just my own personal philosophy on it, based on experience.
Yeah, I think you've got to put the weight on the person. That I'm an alcoholic if I say I am, and that's it. Just like I was saying about the people I've worked with, I'll give them about 6 months. And I don't give them a deadline, but that's what I've got in my mind. Within 6 months, just working with them, I want to see them grow out of that and lose the need to do it. And they nearly always do.
Cocaine?
No, using a label.
No, I'm talking about actually doing the drug. Say somebody's been sober 6 months and they slip on cocaine.
We're going to have a come to Jesus if I'm working with him.
I'm just curious about that because I didn't know. I mean, like I said, it's my own personal experience that I can't do that, but I didn't know if there was some page 32 of the big whatever it says this.
I think the thing we got to keep in mind is our problem, and nobody else is going to take it more serious than me. And so I really want to put the weight on the person that, man, it's your deal. Nobody can really replace what you do when you admit to yourself, I'm alcoholic. That goes to the bone. And if somebody else, if it's just conforming to something, it doesn't have much staying power. So I really like to put the weight on the person for that. Just trying to conform, I don't think does the job.
And it's my experience with guys I've worked with that, if they're sober, for 6 months and then they do slip up on some kind of self-prescribed mood altering chemical, to me, I lay it on their shoulders, but I strongly encourage them to change their sobriety date because for me, sobriety is free from all self-prescribed mood altering chemicals. I think that's a good disclaimer to throw in there.
It's important for us. It's important for me to take full responsibility for my illness and my recovery. And if I don't take it seriously, I don't care what anybody else does. Nobody's going to do what I'll do for myself. Surrender is an inside job. It's not a public job. That's an inside job. And I'm the only guy that knows if I've done that. So I really want to put the weight on the person to deal with that thing.